In this episode, we're going to follow information the way it actually behaves in organizations, which is that it shows up, gets used, moves around, gets copied, gets stored, and then too often just sits there forever. The Certified in Governance, Risk, and Compliance (CGRC) mindset treats that life cycle as something you have to manage intentionally, because unmanaged information becomes a quiet source of risk. Beginners often think security is mostly about stopping outsiders, but a huge amount of security and privacy harm happens simply because data is kept too long, stored in the wrong places, or moved in ways nobody can explain. Tracking information life cycles means you understand where data comes from, what it is used for, where it flows, how long it should exist, and how it is safely disposed of when its purpose is done. This is not just paperwork. It is a way to prevent hidden scope, reduce breach impact, and make compliance defensible. If you can think clearly about life cycle, a lot of later topics, like marking and handling rules, control selection, and evidence, become much easier. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CyberAuthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. An information lifecycle is the set of stages data moves through from creation or collection to final disposal or destruction. Those stages might include creation, processing, storage, sharing, archival, and deletion, but the exact labels matter less than the idea that data is not static. Data changes state, changes location, and changes sensitivity depending on context. For example, a piece of personal information might be collected for a legitimate purpose, then later copied into a report, then later exported for analysis, and suddenly it is in more places than anyone intended. In governance terms, this creates scope risk because systems and processes that handle the data become part of the security and privacy responsibility, even if nobody planned it that way. Lifecycle thinking forces you to ask where data goes and what controls apply at each stage. It also forces you to ask when the data should stop existing, because keeping data without purpose is one of the easiest ways to increase risk without gaining value. When you control lifecycle, you reduce your attack surface and your compliance burden at the same time. Retention is the first major concept to get clear, because retention is simply how long you keep information and why you keep it. Many requirements exist around retention, including legal requirements to keep certain records for a defined period and privacy expectations to not keep personal data longer than necessary. Beginners sometimes assume retention means keep everything as long as possible, because you never know when you'll need it, but that instinct creates long-term risk. The more data you keep, the more data can be exposed in a breach, and the harder it becomes to manage access and accuracy. Retention should be intentional, meaning each category of information has a defined retention period tied to business need and obligations. Retention also includes the idea of minimizing duplicate storage, because data copied into multiple locations becomes harder to control. A mature program treats retention like a policy decision supported by risk analysis, not like a default habit. When retention is clear, teams can build processes that support it rather than improvising. A retention schedule is a structured way to define retention across different types of information, and it's one of the most practical governance tools in this space. Instead of deciding retention case by case, the schedule establishes standard periods based on data type, purpose, and obligation. This reduces conflict because it creates consistent expectations across teams. The key for beginners is to understand that retention schedules are not just legal documents. They are operational rules that must be implemented through controls. If a schedule says a certain record must be kept for a certain time, there must be a process that ensures it is preserved and accessible. If a schedule says data must be deleted after a certain time, there must be a process that ensures it is actually removed from the places it lives. A schedule also needs ownership, because someone must maintain it as laws, contracts, and business needs change. Without ownership, schedules become outdated, and outdated schedules create risk. This is where CGRC thinking shows up. Define the rule, assign accountability, and design evidence. Disposal and destruction are often confused. so it helps to separate them clearly. Disposal is the act of getting rid of information or media in a way that prevents it from being casually recovered, while destruction is a stronger concept that aims to make recovery infeasible. The exact meaning can vary by policy and context, but the practical idea is that not all data and not all media require the same end-of-life treatment. Some information may be disposed of through controlled deletion from systems, while other information may require stronger methods, depending on sensitivity and regulatory expectations. For beginners, the key is that end-of-life handling should match risk. If data is sensitive or regulated, the program should require more rigorous handling and more reliable proof that it is gone. Another important point is that disposal and destruction are not only about digital files. They include physical media and printed records. If a paper record contains sensitive data, tossing it into a regular trash bin is a lifecycle failure. Proper end-of-life handling is about preventing unintended exposure after the data's useful life is over. Data flow is the part of lifecycle tracking that answers where information goes as it moves between people, systems, and organizations. Data flow is important because risk travels with data, and a secure database does not help if the same data is exported into uncontrolled spreadsheets or emailed to wide groups. A data flow view helps you identify where controls must exist, like access restrictions, encryption, approval processes, or monitoring. It also helps you see interconnections, which are one of the biggest sources of hidden scope. When data flows into a vendor system, into a cloud service, or into a partner's environment, governance responsibilities change, and compliance obligations may expand. Beginners sometimes assume data flow is too technical to track, but you can think of it as a simple story. Who creates the data? Who uses it? Where is it stored? Who receives it? And where does it end up? You do not need to memorize complex diagrams to understand the concept. The value is in identifying the main pathways so you can manage them. Lifecycle tracking becomes much more practical when you categorize information, because different categories justify different retention periods and different protection levels. Categories might be based on sensitivity, regulatory obligations, or business criticality, and the exact labels vary, but the point is that not all information deserves the same treatment. For example, sensitive personal information often demands stricter retention limits and stricter access control, while general public information may have fewer constraints. Categorization also helps with disposal and destruction decisions, because higher sensitivity justifies stronger end-of-life controls. Another reason categorization matters is that it improves consistency, which is central to governance integrity. If two teams handle the same kind of data differently, the program becomes unpredictable and hard to defend. Categorization creates shared expectations so people know what rules apply without constant debate. On exam questions, answers that emphasize categorizing data and aligning handling rules to category often reflect mature governance thinking. Ownership and responsibility are also central in lifecycle management, because data does not manage itself. Someone must decide what data is collected, why it is collected, how long it is kept, and how it is disposed of, and that decision must be connected to accountability. Many lifecycle failures happen because everyone assumes someone else owns the data. A system owner might assume the business owns retention decisions, while the business assumes the system team will handle deletion, and then nothing happens. Governance prevents this by assigning ownership roles, such as a data owner who defines requirements and a system owner who implements them, with oversight from compliance and security functions. The goal is clarity, not bureaucracy. When ownership is clear, retention schedules become actionable, disposal processes become routine, and evidence becomes easier to produce. When ownership is unclear, retention becomes accidental and disposal becomes inconsistent, which increases risk over time. Evidence is especially important in lifecycle management because many requirements are about being able to demonstrate that data was handled properly. It is not enough to say data is deleted. You need to be able to show that deletion occurs according to policy and that exceptions are managed. Evidence can include records of retention schedule approvals, logs of deletion activities, documented disposal procedures, and records of media destruction when required. The key is designing evidence collection into the lifecycle process instead of trying to reconstruct it later. This also supports integrity, because it discourages quiet shortcuts like keeping data indefinitely because deletion is inconvenient. A mature program treats evidence as a normal output of lifecycle work. If you can trace from a data category to a retention rule to a disposal action in its proof, you have built a defensible lifecycle management system. That traceability also makes audits and assessments calmer because you can show consistent operation rather than scrambling for ad hoc explanations. Another major lifecycle challenge is duplicates and shadow storage, which is where data proliferates outside official systems. Shadow storage includes personal drives, local copies, unmanaged shared folders, and informal exports created for convenience. Even if the main system has strong controls, these copies often do not, and they can persist long after the official record should be deleted. Lifecycle management must account for this by establishing rules for how data can be exported, where it can be stored, and how it must be protected if it leaves controlled systems. This is not about being punitive. It is about recognizing real human behavior and managing it. If people need exports for legitimate work, governance should provide a safe way to do it rather than pretending it never happens. Otherwise, people will create shadow storage anyway, and the program loses visibility. Good lifecycle governance creates practical pathways that reduce uncontrolled duplication while still enabling business needs. Lifecycle management also intersects directly with privacy expectations because privacy is deeply tied to purpose and necessity. Privacy governance asks not only whether data is protected, but whether it should be collected at all, whether it is used for its stated purpose, and whether it is retained only as long as needed. Retention limits are a privacy control as much as a compliance control, because keeping personal data longer than necessary increases the chance of misuse, exposure, and harm. Data flow also matters for privacy because sharing personal data with third parties, partners, or internal teams can create new purposes and new obligations. A mature program ensures that data flows are documented and justified, not assumed. It also ensures that disposal and destruction decisions match privacy risk, especially for sensitive categories of personal data. In the CGRC mindset, privacy lifecycle management is part of respecting individuals and maintaining trust, not just meeting a rule. That trust is fragile, and lifecycle discipline is one of the most reliable ways to protect it. As we wrap up, tracking information lifecycles is about controlling the full story of data from collection to end of life, so that risk does not quietly accumulate. Retention defines how long data should exist and why, and it should be intentional rather than accidental. Disposal and destruction define how data and media are removed safely, with rigor matched to sensitivity and obligation. Data flow reveals where information travels, which is where hidden scope and hidden risk often live. Categorization, clear ownership, and built-in evidence make lifecycle management sustainable and defensible rather than a constant scramble. When you think this way, you reduce exposure, reduce compliance stress, and increase integrity because you can explain and prove how data is handled. This is exactly the kind of practical governance thinking the CGRC exam wants you to demonstrate. Not just what the words mean, but how the program operates in a way that prevents surprises. If you can follow the lifecycle story and manage it deliberately, you're building one of the strongest foundations for real-world governance, risk, and compliance success.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.